hit midlife, body says no. It's not just about hot flushes and lack of sleep that women are leaving their jobs and the careers which they love, and then hit midlife and just rebelled. So if you Google menopause, you're told to consult a doctor after reading a very scary list of symptoms. But the point is, they're not even trained in menopause, not even gynecologists. The system is set up to represent pharmaceutical industries. There is evidence showing our bodies know exactly what they're doing and why. But, they're cast as dysfunctional and not to be trusted. And so when we come from a different perspective of, well, hang on, how could it possibly serve us?
What does it take to be a financially empowered woman? And what can financially empowered women do together to change the world? A shocking statistic is that around 400,000 women in Australia are at risk of homelessness. And the cause of this is the lack of education about how to build a financial foundation, starting even before we first enter the workforce and well into our retirement years. My name's Dion Payne, and I'm the founder of the Financially Empowered Women podcast. I'm passionate about ending homelessness, and as part of that passion, I chose to look at the systemic barriers that are causing homelessness for women in the first place. The Financially Empowered Women podcast is designed to bring you the best experts from around the world to increase your financial know-how and give you practical and women-specific tips to overcome the challenges you might be facing, such as how to negotiate a better salary, demystifying super, or how to navigate a separation and ensure the assets are distributed fairly. My role is to provide you with the best information out there to change your trajectory and become a financially empowered woman, because you deserve it, and the world needs you more than ever to own your worth and help others to do the same.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this latest episode of the Financially Empowered Women podcast. My name's Dion Payne and I'm your host today. And with me in the studio is Tanishka. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Tanishka. As an author of 6 books, Tanishka is passionate about creating social sustainability by reinstating rites of passage and community building practices, which she's taught for 30 years. A leader in the Red Tent movement, she's trained women to facilitate moon lodges in 44 countries to support women through the most challenging time of the month. She's currently writing her next book, Moonpause, The True Power and Purpose of Midlife and Menopause, due out in September 2027. Hello, Tanishka.
Hello, thank you so much for having me here.
My pleasure. Now, I just want to explain to everybody that's listening, because, obviously the title of the podcast is Financially Empowered Women. As we were talking before, one of the things that I'm realizing more than ever is that yes, we need to talk about financial empowerment, but we also need to look at what's happening for women in a really holistic way. The first season that I did the Financially Empowered Women podcast, it was very straight financial expert advice, which was amazing, and I really enjoyed it. And then at the start of season 2, so at the start of this year, I started hearing women talking about menopause and how menopause was affecting women's financial ability. I was like, okay, this is interesting. And also, as somebody that's going through perimenopause myself, I'm understanding the challenges that are coming, the lack of sleep, the night sweats, all of those things do really impact on my sense of self if I haven't handled them well, and I could really start to see how this could have an impact on finances. So today is why I've brought Tanishka here. I'm really interested in her book myself, selfishly, but I thought that if I'm interested in it, then other people might be interested in it as well. So Tanishka, I know that I just talked a lot in terms of introduction there. I'd love to hear from you. What you do is not necessarily very common. In fact, I'd never really heard that this was something that people do. So how did you get into this? I'm really curious about that.
It's a great question because it's certainly not something my school careers guidance officer suggested, being a mystic. Right. And for those that are still wondering what the heck is that, I basically help people through times of change because that's when we're most vulnerable. And, in our modern culture, we tend to fear change, we fear aging. That's, times of acute stress, such as the midlife crisis, and it's real, it's not imagined. And I used to think that it was avoidable. Now I think it's not just inevitable, but necessary. It's a pummeling of the ego that really matures us. It's like a big growth spurt for our psyche. And we get really clear on what we want and what we don't want. And because that coincides with menopause, for women, that just dials it up because it becomes excruciating not to honor ourselves, not to be authentic and really honor our needs. But to specifically answer your question, when I was 26, I literally ran to the hills. I was watching a thing on Netflix last night about comedians, and I did stand-up comedy in my 20s, and it was like an induction to the Hall of Fame of George Carlin, who was a wonderful counterculture comic. And similarly, he, around the same age, just went, bugger this. The values of the dominant culture don't represent who I am and what I'm about. And that's the kind of reckoning that I went through. And I spent a year living off grid on my own in the bush, in the Otway Ranges. I didn't have a clue. I had to learn how to chop wood and, use a water pump. But it liberated me. It was the best thing that ever happened, even though when I went there, I felt like a complete and utter failure because I just found out I had made a television pilot with the ABC for a show called Good Morning Unemployed. And the show was designed to empower people to see themselves as ethical entrepreneurs and start their own micro businesses. But when the show didn't get picked up, I spiraled, because it wasn't just a career. For me, it was about my mission, to be of service to humanity. And so I did a lot of navel gazing for that year in the bush. And out of that, I found a completely new path. I met these women that said, hey, do you want to come to a goddess workshop? I didn't even know what that was. And I learned about what it meant to be a woman, which is information that used to be our birthright. Before colonisation, all of our ancestors, the women would gather at the darkest time of the moon on the understanding that's when we tend to go into our darker mindset and emotional spaces, and together we get through it. I recently interviewed death doula Sarah Kerr in Canada, and she said, what we can't face alone, we can get through together. And so this is why we've always, for millennia leading up to patriarchy, the women have gathered. And so if there's a bushfire or if there's a flood, it's the women that mobilise community and go, right, what do we need? Mr. So-and-so, needs this. Like, the women are across it. And now we're at a huge transition time, a time between cosmological ages that, again, the Indigenous prophesied and said, we are going to see the women rise up and transform society as we know it. And we know how out of balance it is. So part of that is getting back to more of a share economy. Rianne Eisler talks about the GDP and how it's based on just the fiscal bottom line, and that war is good for the economy, but it ain't good for people, it's not good for the land. So coming back to, a new model of society which reflects the values of the feminine. Like, if we think about our mum, the first most intrinsic value of the Earth Mother is you've got to share. You've got to share your toys, you've got to share with your brother or your sister. And then we go into the institutions and we learn pretty quick that in society it's not a share economy. We need to hoard and we need to compete. And this is out of alignment with the feminine. So when we hit midlife, body says no. It's not just about hot flushes and lack of sleep that women are leaving their jobs and the careers which they love or the businesses which they toiled to create. I know with my business, and then hit midlife and just rebelled. It's like, oh, can't bear to be on a screen, you know?
There's
Long
a lot.
answer.
I was just going to say, there's a lot in what you shared just then. There is, but a lot to sort of, unpack and dig around. And there's one thing that you spoke about just there about the share economy. It's like it's in my bones and sort of culturally. And I think of the example of my grandparents when they moved to the UK. And this was back in the late 60s, early 70s. And because there was a lot of racism at the time, and there was a big migration of people from the West Indies, they did tend to band together and help each other. So I remember hearing that my grandparents, the way that they bought their house was that they banded together with their community, and everybody put money together for the house, and then everybody kind of lived in the house, and then one by one everybody then went and helped other people. So that sharing economy was there right from the get-go. And also I'm realizing that or remembering that I'm the eldest of 6 kids. You can't get away with not sharing. So I hadn't realized that had an impact on the way that I think. So yeah, I just really get this sharing economy and the importance of it. And I think that one of the key things that's happening at the moment around housing insecurity, I can see that there's a real benefit if it creates more intergenerational living together. And if that was the reason for the housing crisis, I don't think that would be a bad thing. And I think that if we can do this intentionally, it's going to be so much better for humanity. But that's my soapbox. Let's bring this back to women and menopause. The other thing that I really see and came up for me when you were talking was that, well, I'll give you an example. So I was at a retreat a little while ago. We did an exercise where all of the women, it was a women's retreat, we all stood in birth order. And that was funny as well, just sort of trying to get us into birth order and going, oh, no, I'm older than you. No, I'm younger than you, etc. Anyway, we stood in, yes, very much so. We ended up standing in birth order. We then went and took our seats in birth order and we were sitting in a circle. So we got to honour the maiden and we got to honour the crone in that circle. And even now I get goosebumps because I remember that honouring and the acknowledgement of the wisdom that the crone brought to the circle, and the contrast between what we're seeing in the outside world in terms of women over 55 being the fastest group facing homelessness, just being cast to the side. And the realization for me is that when we do that, when we don't honor the wisdom of the women, when we leave them to sleep in their cars and suffer anxiety and all of that, we as a society are missing out on that. And it also has not escaped my attention that I could be one of those women in the future if I don't get my, like if something happened for me. So this is so important, and I'm really glad that you're here, that we can be talking about this.
Thank you. I'd love to respond to a few things in there, if I may. First
Please
of all,
do.
If you've been watching the news lately, it's easy to feel a sense of despair. Between power-hungry global leaders and absolute chaos and division, it can feel like things are spiraling out of control. It's easy to feel overwhelmed and just to have a sense of powerlessness. But there is a way to push back. we can stop looking at what they are doing and start looking at what we can do. At Women for Homes, we firmly believe that where we put our money is making a choice for the kind of world that we want to live in. Our mission is powerful: to mobilise 1 million women to invest $5,000 to end homelessness by 2030, whilst being financially empowered along the way. It's practical, it's tangible, it's something that we can do now, and it's something that we can do to take our power back. Join us at www.womenforhomes.com. That's women4homes.com.
I remember as a kid in New Zealand, I was born in Australia, but we also lived, my mum's a Kiwi, so we lived in New Zealand for a bit, and watching Love Thy Neighbour, which was a show dealing with the racial tension that was in England when the immigrants were coming over from the Caribbean. Yeah. And so that really left a mark on me as a kid. And I was fortunate enough to live in Morocco the last 3 winters. And when I first turned up there, I was using my inheritance doing free consciousness raising events around the planet, much to the horror of my dad. But my host in Morocco, she said, people have a different mindset here. They think anything is possible. And I'm speaking about the locals who, are Amazigh, also known as Berber, they're mystics, they're desert people. But they have that intrinsic share as a value, so that if they want to do something, if they want to start a business or build a house or whatever, the whole community comes together to make it happen. So, we have been sort of told that Darwinism is our true nature, survival of the fittest, and it's actually not true. If we look at nature, it's like there's a wonderful documentary called I Am, and it says how they cherry-picked a lot of Darwinism to make it fit patriarchy. But just like you have flocks of birds and schools of fish, when we move together in unison or in a way that is for the collective whole, we're far more impressive as a humanity, as a consciousness. But the menopause piece, I shared with you privately, I've been homeless a number of times. The first time was when my daughter was 5, and it broke me. And, and part of that is because as a mystic, that's not very patriarchal. That is not a career that holds a high value in a patriarchal culture. Yeah, so, you might be seen as a charlatan, a fortune teller. It's really, sort of downgraded, and dismissed as kooky and marginal, and so whereas if you were to opt for more patriarchal careers like a scientist, an engineer, a lawyer, a doctor, you're going to be in the top echelon of earning. So if you apply for, I'd go for, applications for rental places, and there'd be sometimes over 20, 2-income earning couples. And I was there as a sole parent going, there's no point in even filling in an application. And I finally found a home where we lived for 10 years, myself and my daughter, through community. I was asked to write an article for Spellcraft magazine on how to find the perfect home. And as I was writing the article, I got a phone call from a single mum who'd seen my ad in the local school newsletter, and the school where my daughter went, when I broke down in tears in the office of the school, asking them if they would run the ad, and the secretary said no, and then the principal came out and said, run the ad and let's run it in all the local schools. And it was through that power of community that we found a place to live. So women have to be resourceful, and that's one of the strengths of the feminine. And I kind of wanted to tee in there that health is the greatest wealth. And if we lose our health, we lose our ability to be as resourceful. When we're overwhelmed, when we're stressed, which, in perimenopause, our cortisol goes through the roof for multiple reasons. And so we are less resourced internally, which makes us more vulnerable. So we do need to look after the elders and women who are treasures. They're embodied archives of wisdom, of experiential lived wisdom. And these are the women that we want around the young. So I love your point about intergenerational spaces. I'm trying to remember the name of the little Japanese island where they have people who live the longest per capita.
Yes, I know
Okinawa.
which one you mean. I can't think of it.
Yeah, I
Yes.
think it's Okinawa. And it was featured in the documentary Happy. And one of the features is regular intergenerational contact. And they've done in some of the Nordic cultures social experiments where they have kindergarten children coming into aged care facilities, as well as young people that are homeless moving in as residents into aged care, and how everybody thrives from that. It's like, this is how we're meant to live.
100%, yeah. And so going back to the menopause, perimenopause side of things, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing? Why are the wheels coming off for women when this is happening?
Well, I mean, the first and most obvious reason is the physical symptoms. And, the physical symptoms are they're exacerbated because of the industrialization of our world. Okay, so, when people sort of think, oh, you Gen X are making a lot of noise about menopause, or you're not as tough as the previous generations, it's like, well, just hold on a minute. We've got a lot of additional factors, which I go into in detail in my book. And what's happening is our bodies are sounding the alarm as canaries, going, the industrial world and science is what fuels industry, and we're totally groomed to hand over agency and authority to science as the expert. So if you Google menopause, you're told to consult a doctor after reading a very scary list of symptoms, which would motivate anyone to take immediate action. But the point is, they're not even trained in menopause, not even gynecologists, the specialists that are sociably trained in women's reproductive health. And it's not the doctor's fault. The system is failing them because the system is set up to represent pharmaceutical industries. The Flexner report that came out in the 1920s effectively shut down the natural medicine schools and established the gold standard as chemical medicine, modern medicine, which is only 200 years old. But if we go back to Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, medicine systems that have been around for thousands of years, they acknowledged menopause was when women needed additional support, and they had specific protocols to support women through. But you won't see that on Google. It's like big pharma and big tech are in bed together, keeping each other's feet warm. So you've got the physical symptoms, okay, which is, gosh, too many to list in our episode, but you'll know if you've got them, which is things like mood swings, insomnia, hot flushes, gosh, stiffness, joint
Night
pain,
sweats,
vertigo.
brain
Yeah, I
fog.
mean, yeah, it's just, it is a storm. And this is the other thing, if we don't have support, if over 70 women, if they even read about other women experiencing this, the validation is so healing, it calms their nervous system. Whereas when we're dealing with this in isolation, it is so much harder. So hence we're seeing women opting to take a pill just so that they continue to hold their life together if they're trying to get up in the morning and be work ready at a certain time and get their kids to school and, just take care of the endless sort of administration of being human when you need a QR code to fart these days. I mean, everything is taking so much longer, and yet we're told it's for our convenience, you know what I mean? And I mean, just that additional blue light from devices is the most disruptive thing to our circadian rhythm, our sleep-wake cycle. So, there are so many factors that are imploding on us at this life stage. But then the other thing is midlife. So menopause is one thing, then we've got midlife, and midlife is actually initiated, and this will sound a bit woo-woo to some people, by astrological transits. So, for instance, if you think back to when you were 14, everyone was a nightmare. Like, I think grade 9 teachers should get paid double. This is when girls' skirts go up. It's when boys grow dreadlocks, and they rebel against authority. Well, that's when we're halfway around Saturn return. Saturn is the authority, and we push back. So in an ancient traditional culture, you'd have the elders in charge of rites of passage. So they'd make sure that the whole tribe matured and supported each other to mature and bowed to the wisdom of the greater cycles that are initiating us. So it's not just our bodies that initiate us, this, oh God, I'm physically becoming compost. That's a challenge to my ego, particularly for a woman in a patriarchal culture where, our value is placed on how appealing we are to men. But then, in midlife, we encounter a number of relentless challenges. This might be having to look after elderly parents and teenagers, so we become the meat in the sandwich. Do you know what I mean? Or we might have friends or family that have health crises, or ourselves. They've done, insurance companies have done studies showing that a lot of trauma from childhood manifests as acute and chronic conditions in midlife. So this is when we're more likely to be dealing with a very acute health challenge. Then homelessness is another stressor that can happen, sort of alongside the empty nest, which can be a catalyst for family breakdown and divorce. So, it used to be, the chart used to be, if you were moving house or going through a divorce or whatever, these are huge life events. Well, in midlife, you've got multiple big life stressors happening simultaneously, and that's the definition of a crisis. So, we need each other to get through this, and there have been studies showing that it is the quality of our relationships that determine our happiness, how safe and connected we feel. There was a Harvard one over 8 decades, and consistently it found that we just need to feel safe and connected, and that's what share housing provides. Whereas when we're all in our little individual isolated boxes, no wonder we're looking at the highest rates of suicide, depression and anxiety. It's like, this is not a healthy way to live. And so even if you've got the fiscal wealth, like the Grail parable of the Fisher King, this wealthy man who's amassed everything and he's got a wound that he can't heal, and it's his wounded thinking that manifests as wounds physically, because he can't enjoy what he's amassed, because he hasn't taken that journey to really find his soul. And that's what the midlife crisis catalyzes, when we go, hang on, whatever I've neglected, now I've got to go and look at that. And the universe kind of conspires to force us to do that. So if we've been all about the job, all about, our mission, boom, we're going to do a 180, which can be a rude shock.
Indeed. And I'm really, well, let me say, we're getting to the end of our interview. And I really wanted to ask you about your book. So your book is called Moonpause, The True Power and Purpose of Midlife and Menopause. Tell us a little bit about the book.
Oh, bless. Well, if you have a look at most of the titles on menopause in particular, they're all evidence-based and they're all by doctors. And they're all pushing bioidentical hormones, which is a synthetic intervention. Even though they, sort of package it as natural, it goes through the same synthetic manufacturing process, So it's not natural in the outcome. And there are serious health risks which are downplayed, but also ecological risks that it poses and risks to future generations. So I'm sort of challenging the mainstream narrative that is dominating the airwaves, not just books, but podcasts and reels on social media. I know every time I get on, Facebook, I'm absolutely bombarded with, summits and interviews and ads and for supplements as well as for, bioidentical hormones. And yet, most women feel like they can't get information, let alone ancient knowledge, indigenous wisdom, collective embodied wisdom. And, I've really had to go down the rabbit hole, going through so many studies, because a lot of this is deliberately buried, because if it's not going to make money for the pharmaceutical industries, you're not going to see it. You're just not going to see it. So the book is about that, but it's also about the fact that it's a shamanic initiation. And the nature of it is it's going to take us down. It's going to confront us with our nemesis, with the parts of us. A lot of women go through a crisis in confidence. I'm currently doing a survey, and, this is a hallmark of this transition. And it's not that, our bodies are betraying us. Again, this is the mainstream narrative. I have found that where there is evidence showing our bodies know exactly what they're doing and why, but, they're cast as dysfunctional and not to be trusted. And so when we come from a different perspective of, oh, well, hang on, let's look with curiosity as to why the body's doing that. How could it possibly serve us in terms of longevity and resilience? And I've got the evidence for that. So I'm really excited to share it, as well as the journey of the inner heroine, which the word psyche means soul. And the fact that, we're kind of led to believe it means mind, which is why the approach to mental health is literally mental. It needs to be a mind, body, soul approach to midlife and go beyond just mindfulness techniques. This is about retrieving the lost birthright of women's wisdom to help initiate women through this transition, so they don't just take a pill and lie down and overwhelm.
I love this, and I feel like that is probably the best line that we could conclude this podcast episode with. I just love what you had to share about how women can reclaim their power, why this is such a tricky transition period, but I feel that there's a lot of hope, and that's certainly what you've shared. Now, I also remember that you were doing the survey and you were looking for participants for the survey. So if somebody would like to participate in this, how could they get hold of you?
Thank you so much. So if they head over to themoonwoman.com, which is my website. Now, I do believe everyone is a moon woman. It was a name that was given to me and it stuck. But you'll see on the homepage a link to this survey. I'm gathering 1,000 women aged between 40 and 65 because your experience matters. It's a collective archive that we're building of women's experiences from around the world. So I'd really love if anyone is listening in that age group to come and share your voice and also to help spread the word.
Beautiful. Well, Moon Woman, thank you for sharing your wisdom today. It was a real pleasure having you, and looking forward to seeing the book come out in September next year.
Absolutely, and we'll be donating, a portion of the profits to your wonderful charity, because I believe in what you're doing so much, and it's so dear to my heart, having lived through homelessness. So thank you, and thanks for giving me a voice on your platform.
Thank you so much.